Welcome to The Art of Adventure. This is episode 295 with Ashley Wiegand. The Art of Adventure is the show where we look at human potential, entrepreneurship, unconventional lifestyles, travel, and cutting-edge science. I'm your host, lead explorer and guide, Derek Loudermilk. You can check out derekloudermilk.com to find the show notes for this episode. And real quick, before we start the episode, I want to tell you about the League of Superconductors. That is a business mastermind that I am running this year. And if you are a thought leader, that is a coach, an author, a retreat host, a speaker, or combination of the above, and you have a very specific mission, something that you love to teach, something that you love to help people with, and you want to both grow your business, grow your influence, and yourself as a leader, that's what the mastermind is about. And you can find out more about that at derekloudermilk.com. On my coaching tab, there's a place you can apply for the league this year. And this ties in with the podcast. Part of my job is researching the best peak performance techniques, technology, information. And when I find something interesting on the podcast, I often bring that into my coaching. So what I really love to do is find something new that I can then integrate into a peak performance training for my entrepreneurs, for my thought leaders. And so today on the podcast, we have a great example of that. Ashley Wiegand is the founder of the Neurotherapy Center of St. Louis, and I went to see her to have a neurofeedback session. This investigation and this episode is part of the series on the Art of Adventure that we're doing, looking at cutting-edge modalities in health, metaphysics, peak performance. And there's only a small handful of neurofeedback specialists here in St. Louis. So I got to go meet with her in person and have the full experience. And we picked a protocol that we're going to use to enhance my performance. And so neurofeedback can be used for performance enhancement in healthy individuals, but it can also be used for dealing with dysfunction like PTSD, anxiety, ADD. There's a whole bunch of indications for it there. And it basically helps your brain spend more time in a desired state. So this is really cool because right now we're at a point where we're starting to understand the brain more and we're developing these technologies. The price of monitoring brainwave activity and being able to pinpoint what's going on in the brain and where, the price is coming down. So these types of things are something that you can actually, as a at-home consumer, start to use and start to play with and start to gain benefits from. So you'll actually hear some of the exact headbands, the exact protocol we used when I was in Dr. Wiegand's lab, what my experience was and the results, and how you can apply this, how you can go out and find neurofeedback and biofeedback and how to take advantage of that. So without further ado, here is Dr. Ashley Wiegand. Ashley Wiegand, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
This is really exciting. This is another episode, another show in the series where I get to be a guinea pig and investigate different modalities of peak performance and healing modalities. And so interestingly, a lot of these modalities are both. They're both for healing and can be used for enhancing performance in healthy normals. So that's super cool. You know, there's implications, everything from psychedelics to hypnosis to neurofeedback. And we're going to talk about neurofeedback today because I got to do a session with Dr. Ashley. You're the founder of the Neurotherapy Center of St. Louis. And I can't remember exactly how I found you, was Googling around. I had heard of neurofeedback from some of my podcaster friends and 40 years of Zen. And so I started looking into it, and I love that we get to collaborate with you on this. So where I'd love to start actually is I came and did a session with you, and we put the headband on and did some practice runs. And so I want to give you a chance. I feel like I'm talking a lot, so let me give you a chance to talk. When I approached you with this, you said, okay, let's try this protocol for neurofeedback. How did you pick what we were going to do, and then I'll tell you what happened in the days following.
Yeah, absolutely. So because we had talked a little bit, I'm aware you're looking into different modalities and experiences of kind of enhancing performance or wellness or just your potential. So the protocol I selected for the training that you did is a really common protocol for what we call peak performance, which is enhancing performance. And that can be used for anything, but in the field, a lot of it's used for executives or in athletics for performing in a match or a game. It also can be used in musical performance. So it's loosely similar to what you hear a lot, like a state of flow or being in the zone. And since we had talked, I thought that would be the best protocol for you to do, since it most aligned with your kind of core interests and research with your podcasting work.
Yeah, so that was perfect. And so the headband, there's like a couple different ones. You said there's the one with all, like the hat with the electrodes, and then there's the one that sort of wraps around the front, and then the contact point in the back was the one that we did. What's that one called again?
Yeah, so that software is called MindLift, and it's MYNDLAFT. And so that's the training software that you did. The hardware that you used is Muse, and I think I wanted you to use that hardware and software as well, because I think, again, that most aligned with your goal and focus on the podcast. And I thought that'd be of most interest to your listeners, because Muse, some of the folks that listen to you, they might already know about the Muse headband. It's pretty common now. Like, you could buy it on Amazon probably for about $200 or so. And they market themselves as a meditation headband. So that's kind of a basic fusion of what we talked about as far as meditation is changing the mind and changing the brain. And then with the Muse headband, you have sensors on the front, and then in the rubber fibers actually on the ears. And as you go towards a meditative state, as you go more in that direction, those sensors pick that up and you receive a reward. And so it gets kind of technical, but I'll explain it. Hopefully that's of interest. But so for Muse, they have the hardware and their kind of proprietary software. And I believe, I haven't checked it this last month, but their training is, as you go towards a meditative state, you would hear there would be wind and storm if you have a busy brain. If you're lots of thinking and you go towards the meditative state, it kind of quiets the storm, right? So that would be a really good resource if you have folks looking to, maybe they're prone to worry or have a lot of ideas bouncing around, but sometimes have trouble quieting the mind. I think it's a really good tool open to the public that can help enhance and make your meditation practice more efficient and more effective. So that's why I wanted to use that hardware with you. And then the software that you use, it is a neurofeedback software. So as far as I know, the company still requires you to have some sort of health professional setting your protocols. But the difference between just that hardware and the proprietary software and then the MindLift software that you use is basically versatility. So if you just buy the headband with Muse, you do their proprietary protocol, you don't know what it is, they protect it, and it's just one. What I did with you, as you noticed, there was that auxiliary sensor connected into the headset, and so we can train many different areas on the brain, and then also I can set the protocols. So you did kind of a in the zone flow protocol, but I could, you could do training to enhance focus, you could do training to help with sleep, and so there's just many, many more options. So that's the kind of the technical side of your session that you did.
Okay, cool. So it's a combination of openly available, the headband you can buy on the market. Anybody can go buy it, but then the software, you need to know how to use it, this particular software. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. You want someone who knows neurofeedback setting the protocols, but it is, why I thought the company was such a good fit for you is because they're really trying to make it a lot more accessible, more for, wellness or enhancing performance. And so people can use it for home training. It's, as you noticed, it's Bluetooth. There's not a lot of extra wires or anything like that. So it travels very well. So it really seemed to be that bridge. If there's the Muse headband, but if then some of your listeners really want to intensify their experience and the intervention a little bit more, then I think that would be the next natural step for your audience. And again, you need to find a professional who does MindLift, but you could set up like a rental, rent it at home. They set the protocols and then you train it at home. So it's a really good fit for people who have general, a foundation of wellness and health already and are looking to maximize.
Yeah. So what I like here is there's the ability to improve performance. On your website, you highlight using it for anxiety and PTSD and depression and things like that. So it also sounds like it can benefit a lot in that area. And so because what we're talking about is brain states, is that why it's like the same underlying thing that you're working on?
Yes, I would say so. And there's, like any field and specialty, there's a lot of, different approaches, and people can get pretty territorial about what you're training and why and what equipment is the best way to do that. But how I conceptualize it is, yes, you're training, I would say, flexibility and brain states. So I have people, so again, the focus of my practice is more clinical concerns, as you said, like PTSD, anxiety, insomnia. But it's just, I kind of think of it as a spectrum of, brain states or brain health, the brain's ability to shift into a state as needed or desired, and then shift out of it, and how responsive it is to context in the present. And so, those are kind of on a spectrum in my mind. But I have people who might come and they have ADHD and they like their creativity. And I've had, more than a dozen people say to me, like, please don't take my creativity. I don't need to change my personality. And that's not what this is, of course. What we want people to be able to do is, like I said, shift into a brain state when it's contextually needed. Like if you're in a classroom, can you focus and comprehend? And then if you're at home, if you want to daydream and doodle and all of those things, then you can do that as well. So I do, and the approach that I use, I think of it as training brain state. Yes.
Okay, so this is a great time to sort of share my experience, because you said, okay, this is actually, because it's something you train, it's actually better to do many sessions, 7 or 10 or however many sessions.
Yeah.
And I really wasn't expecting too much because of that. It was cool to test it out, but I didn't expect to notice any changes. And that afternoon, I did a meditation, and basically since then, so that was like over the last 3 weeks, I'm able to enter this. It's like a different meditative state than I've been able to access before, and it's more like a lucid dream state where I basically don't have awareness of my physical body, but I'm completely consciously aware. And normally, I feel like that's a precursor to falling asleep, where I might be in that state for just a moment, and then I would just drift off to sleep. But I'm able to stay in this place for quite a long time and like think about things and, like go places in my mind. I'm sure it's quite useful. I haven't figured out what the uses are of it yet, but it's remarkable to be able to stay there, because it's very, I can tell, like, okay, my body is like very relaxed and resting, but my mind is able to sort of move freely. And I'm actually wondering, what type of state would you think that would be? What brain would that be? Like a theta state?
You said your mind still feels active.
Yeah, like I can direct it and I feel consciously aware.
So I would still put you in an alpha state then with that.
Okay.
If there's a little less conscious awareness and almost like this kind of, it's probably a lower alpha state, like there's a higher band and a lower band. So it's probably lower because you're not noticing the kind of the boundary of your body, right? Like you're not noticing that, which sidebar, I think it's a super cool state to be in. I don't know if you like it, but I think it's really fun and relaxing. When you're going to get into theta, you would notice less awareness and less conscious thought than what I think you're describing. Okay. If we wanted to be really technical about it, we would put that like 19 channel cap on you and record it when you do that. But from what you're describing it subjectively, that would be my hunch, is you're still in an alpha state.
And so it might help to clarify, we've got beta, alpha, theta, delta states, like these four sort of broad distinctions, but they're all a range of frequencies. Could you talk a little bit more about, what these frequency states are?
Of course, yeah. So there's kind of like the four core brainwave frequencies, and it's a way to break down. It's actually based on the speed of the brainwave, so how many waves per second. And so, as you said, it's delta, theta, alpha, beta, and so delta would be considered the slowest waves. Then the second slowest is theta. Alpha is kind of that mid-range, and then we can put beta and high beta together. They're the highest or the fastest. And so those waves are going to correlate to certain functions or certain functionalities, and then certain perceptual states as well. So a lot of times where like the state terminology that we're using is used most often for like an alpha state or a theta state. Those are the two most common. Delta is typically most prominent like when you're sleeping or in some pathological problematic times like a severe TBI. So, but that delta correlates a lot to brainstem function. So survival mechanisms, biological maintenance, it's those slow oscillations in the background, right, with our brainstem that very sophisticated, very important, but don't relate to conscious, voluntary processes. Theta, go ahead.
Do people in comas have all the brain states?
That is a very good question. I would have to get back with you on that as far as what does a QEEG on someone in a coma look like. I would, just going hypothetical, I would think they would mostly be in delta, and that there would be an absence or a deficit, especially in beta and high beta. But since I deal more in the mental health realm, and that's kind of a medical focus, I don't know if there's been any research as far as, so there's what I do, which is, the mental health application side, and then it's dealing with the evaluation that we didn't do with you that is usually necessary for more clinical concerns. It's called the QEEG. The Q stands for quantitative.
And that's the brain mapping? Yeah,
that's the brain mapping. And I don't know, I would have to get back to you on if there's been research as far as doing that the QEEG on folks in a coma. Because then what's different is like a medical EEG, which is what you would get a neurologist to look at you for like epilepsy or seizure. And they don't use a normative database for that. They just look at the raw brainwaves or raw squiggly lines. So,
okay. Well, I'll see if I can find something for the show notes. If there's a
we'll see if we can
good article
find
for that.
We can email about that. But then theta, kind of as you alluded to, that's going to relate to feelings more, and so that's going to correlate with some limbic system function. So that's amygdala, if you're familiar with those terms. So that's an emotional brain, a mammalian brain, so to speak. But states or like a subjective state that we notice when theta is up, that's going to be in that dreamlike state, daydreaming, like kind of the deepest forms, and this would be more your expertise than mine, some of the deepest forms of meditation would involve theta, where there's not a lot of conscious thought. You're just kind of a present being. But I think that's the best example of, having no thoughts, but still being awake. Mm-hmm. You would have, your theta would have to increase. And it's also associated with creativity. And then alpha, that has to do with mood regulation and sensory integration. So again, that correlates a lot to, that was the protocol that you did, increasing your alpha, decreasing your beta. And so that's going to be, again, think of very related to mindfulness. So you want to be in the present moment. Your brain is synchronizing and integrating sensory information. You're able to just respond in the present. but there's not a lot of self-talk or self-criticism or self-monitoring, like, how am I doing? Was that good or bad? How do they perceive me? That would be absent, and that would be associated more with beta. But then also there's still some alertness. You're not about to fall asleep. You're not groggy, but it's kind of that, oftentimes it relates to kind of that idealized state that gets thought of a lot with meditation. Right.
Cool. And then the beta is the like monkey mind, the chattering.
Yeah. So the chatter would be, so beta, so no brainwave frequency is like good nor bad, right? It's just, it's too much, too little. Is it inflexible? So if someone has too much beta, so they're kind of in a beta state, too much, that's that monkey mind, brain chatter.
Okay.
People are, when you're worrying and thinking and you can't quiet your mind down, you can't be in the moment, you can't fall asleep.
In the middle of the night kind of thing, like.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah. Which is, it's tricky though, and this will, again, I think relate to your audience, is a lot of times people, if it doesn't get carried away, people like their beta, because that's the ambitious folks, the entrepreneurs, the always wanting to improve yourself, the have these big ideas. A lot of times, I'm making a generalization, but people will have kind of elevated beta because it's kind of that ambition and that get up and go, which of course is great, right? But if you think of health from this perspective, it's, you don't want to be locked in any one state too long and not be able to shift out of it. So otherwise, healthy, a healthy beta state would be, critical thinking, problem solving, drawing up a blueprint and making the calculations, making a plan or a rationale, trying to make an important decision. Beta is very important for all of that.
Okay. Strategic stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And I like how you frame it, the ability to, what did you say? The flexibility of states, like that you can move between them rather than just like getting stuck or letting something else determine what state you're in.
Right.
And we're talking about, there's so many things where there's a frequency, a hertz, a vibration. There's the radio dial, the planet has its own frequency. There's these binaural beats and things that have frequencies.
Right.
And so frequency is just like how fast or slow a wave pattern is moving. So it could be like bioelectric, like in the brain, or it could be magnetic or electromagnetic frequency. So all these frequencies, I think it can get confusing.
Right.
Even for me, I'm a little confused because we're measuring in hertz, but it's like different things that we're measuring. So what are we measuring in the brain?
Yeah, that's a great question. You're right, because it does get confusing, especially if you've looked into other aspects. So what we're actually measuring is, the electrical impulse of the brain, which is what you said, they're chemical, electric, right? The brain is chemical, electric. There's neurotransmitters and there's the electrical component. So there actually has to be like thousands to tens of thousands of neurons have to fire together for that sensor on your head to even pick it up.
Oh, wow.
So we're not measuring down to the neuron, right? Like we're measuring, so it really relates more to like networks in certain areas. So there has to be thousands of neurons firing together for it to be powerful enough to be measured with this equipment. So it gets pretty technical, and then after a certain point we get beyond my expertise to like electrical engineering or really heavy neuroscience. But yeah, think of it as speed of impulses. So the electrical firing, right, is you have the negative charged ions flowing in to the neuron, and that changes the charge, the impulse that gets read. So when those groupings fire together, that's what we're measuring. And so then the frequency are like the speed of those nerve signals being sent. So if they're like firing together at like 4 impulses per second, that would be 4 hertz.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So four times per second. So it's oscillating four times per second.
And what's interesting in the brain is a second or 2 is kind of slow in the brain. Like that's more like maybe an hour or a day for us. So things usually happen in fractions of a second, right, in the brain.
People are talking a lot about 5G and is it going to be dangerous? Like, does it have impact on brain wave states? Do you know?
You mean like cell phone use?
Right.
From a actual, so that would be outside of my expertise as far as I know there's the electromagnetic field, right, of anything electrical. And then there's concerns about that impacting the brain and the body. But unfortunately I couldn't speak to that as far as any studies or research in my field at this point about the dangers. More of the studies are that relate to that are not to the actual 5G, but how electronics and things they make our brain more used to interruption. And so that's kind of undercutting our attention span. Because when you're used to a little ping or a little vibration, the brain is responsive to whatever it's exposed to over and over, right? That's repetition. And the brain is wired to be conditioned. That's why, right, if you've done something over and over, if you see a cue that you're about to do the thing you've done 1,000 times, the brain will start to get ready for that state or how it needs to focus or relax to do that. So that would be the only part that I can help you out with is the constant interruptions undercut our attention span.
Gotcha. So have you seen people coming in for treatment regarding trying to combat the interruptions recently?
Yeah, I think it plays out in two ways. I think it can, and this is just my observation of clinical experience for the last 10 years, I think it can kind of exaggerate or exacerbate a propensity. So if someone's already prone to be a worrier or hypervigilant, or always having to check in, having a device that's constantly pinging can make it worse. And then I also have, I have kiddos and adults who come in for ADHD, disorganized, trouble remembering, trouble following through. And then a lot of times there will be just really high use of electronics, video games, social media, etc. And I've actually found, that heavy use can interfere with their therapy, can make them less responsive. Kind of like if you were going to the gym to work out 5 times a week or 4 times a week, but you're drinking Monster drinks and eating cotton candy and not sleeping, it's only going to help you so much. Yeah. And so, again, we're not talking about an hour or two when people are doing this heavy, excessive use with electronics that can actually interfere. There's a book about that. It's called iMinds, with kind of a play on the Apple devices. So just the letter I, Minds.
iMind.
Yeah. The author's last name is Swingle, but she did her dissertation work on that. And she also does neurofeedback about how, so that would give you a much more in-depth look about how it's interfering and exacerbating the problem.
Okay, gotcha. And actually, I'm curious, because you have this clinical experience and, family therapy and stuff, how did you come to be doing neurofeedback and biofeedback?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when I figured out I wanted to, so my license is in family therapy, as you know. So after I decided I wanted to be a therapist and finished my master's, I actually still had never heard of biofeedback and neurofeedback. And then when I moved to St. Louis and I was just starting off working as a family therapist, I actually, every field has their little professional organizations, and I joined that one for St. Louis. And when I was going to one of the monthly meetings, the first time I heard of neurofeedback was the presentation by another practitioner in the area at the time. And it was one of those cool things where kind of how my brain worked and my passions actually fit in really well with it, because I actually have a science, I really like science, and I also really like interpersonal relationships and psychology. And neurofeedback and biofeedback, it's just a great fusion, in my opinion, of this two, as well as the mind and the brain, or the brain and the body. So I have an exercise science bachelor's degree, actually, and then I have this, family therapy master's. And so when I heard this presentation on neurofeedback, everything just kind of clicked for me, because it kind of, instead of just focusing on one side or the other, it tries to integrate the two. And so then I was actually able to later on work for this person and kind of learn this as an apprenticeship. And it made a lot of sense to me, as far as, treatments or therapies that just address the biological components versus insight-based therapy or talk therapy, which I'm a big proponent of. But sometimes I could see that there was limitations with just one or the other. And when I was learning this, it just seemed like it increased efficiency and how effective it was, because it was kind of addressing both avenues at the same time. And, I joked with you, but I kind of consider myself a nerd. Like I like the charts and the graphs and the objective quality to it. And I think what's neat about that, and again, this is speaking more clinically, but I think it would relate to your audience, is that there's something very validating to people. Like, let's say you've had depression or you have ADHD, and because this looks at brain dynamics, it measures brain dynamics, which relates to brain function and brain state. When you can see a chart that shows your brain is kind of in a distracted state, and it has nothing to do with your character, your intelligence, or your willpower, but there's a graph that can quantify it, there's something very validating and therapeutic in and of itself. So that's why I just like it as an approach. I think it's very person-centered, and it's holistic, and it, when presented and used in the right way, it enhances self-understanding. And I think it validates and measures an area that's really been missing in the health field and the mental health field. And I think people want to feel better if they feel like they can. And I think it provides a more active process to be an agent in your own healing, your own wellness, or in your case, just in your own reaching your potential. And that just makes people feel better than if you're just being given something that might take a symptom away, as opposed to being actively a part of it. And learning, people almost always, their self-awareness increases when they do neurofeedback as well, because it sensitizes you to subtleties, like subtleties of your brain states, or we think thoughts in our head all the time, but those thoughts can have consequences. They're engaging certain networks, and every time you have a certain thought or engage a certain network, it strengthens it, right? Whether you want it to or not. And obviously I'm biased, but I think it's a really neat field and approach.
That actually brings me to probably the coolest part of the actual session that we did, which was when we did the longer 10-minute or maybe 15-minute training session. It's first of all, it's gamified. So you talked about the sound, where it's like it's rewarding you if you're getting more, because we were training alpha. So if I was getting more into alpha, then the sound would be like happy birds chirping. And then if I was in the wrong state and too much in the beta state, too much going on, then it was like a thunderstorm. So just like seeing like, oh, my brain feels like this, and then it's telling me this. So this is like the immediate feedback. And what I was doing was, because right away I was able to get into the state super quickly at the beginning of the session. And I was like, well, that's easy. I've got it. And then, so I said, okay, well, what is it like to go back out of the state? And I was able to oscillate back and forth between the states. And it actually shows up on the data that you sent me, the graph, and this was really interesting. I was imagining my breath, like you do in meditation when you observe your breath going in and out. And when I would think about that, I would actually get out of alpha back into beta. And so I was expecting the opposite. I was expecting like, oh, if you use one of these common meditation techniques or styles that would help get me into alpha, but it actually didn't, maybe distracted me too much. And I was getting out of the desired state when I thought about visualizing my breath. So that was really neat just to play with that. And so whenever I would do that, it would go out, and then whenever I would stop, it would go back in, and I could, toggle my brain state back and forth.
And that, let me say a couple of things on that, because one, when you described it, I would have expected the opposite as well, because as I understand, you are a regular meditator, and visualization can be associated with alpha or increasing alpha. So I would have thought it had the opposite effect. So one, what I think is so useful about the technology is it's objective. So, when people ask, like, what do I do to enhance a certain state? I can of course coach them and make recommendations. And when I know the person, use the right language that could help them. But what helps is, or what you're supposed to do is just whatever helps you get more of the feedback. And so the same subjective strategy, while there might be general trends, the same strategy is not going to work for each individual person. And some of that depends on how people approach learning and how you approach trying. And that's something so subtle that makes a really big difference, because a lot of times when we're making effort to try something new or figure it out, that does, activates us a little bit, makes us a little more alert and a little more motivated and focused. But people can often ramp up their stress when they do that. So my theory is that I don't think you were getting stressed when you were doing that, but I just think you were engaging. It was increasing your beta too much when you were doing a tangible exercise, because you're just having to engage your brain more than the thresholds were set for you to. So just the fact that you were doing a strategy was increasing the beta.
Interesting. Yeah. But it was really cool just to, go through the experience and then look at the chart and see the wave pattern go up. Like, okay, now you're doing good. Now you're doing bad. It's a very, very immediate reward. And so when we're talking about flow states, traditionally we haven't been able to use feedback like this to know if you're in a flow state. You just try, you just do the things, go surfing or do something creative or whatever to try to get in, but you can't guarantee that you would get into a flow state. So this seems like it would just help you unlock those states more regularly, more consistently.
Yep, absolutely. And that's why I think what is advantageous about this technology is, for some people, it's really hard to sit in a room, let's say meditation, and just try to meditate. Like that, there are certain folks where that can feel pretty easy to and natural to, or of course, if you practice enough, you get better at it and you can do it. But sometimes that's really hard for certain temperaments or certain personalities, however you want to categorize people. And what I think, kind of like you said, when you're getting that immediate feedback and then something tangible, it takes away a lot of that guesswork. Like, oh, I think this will increase my alpha. Like you did a visualization, which is about your breathing, which is a very reasonable thing to try to increase alpha. That makes sense. But because of the feedback that you got, actually your alpha was dropping when you were doing that. So it takes away a lot of the guesswork. So that just makes the learning faster, and it can make it engaging in a different way, because when you know the feedback's related to your brain, it literally kind of creates this brain-computer interface, or the auditory feedback or the visual is mirroring your internal state. And there's just something engaging about that instead of just trying to do it on your own. So I think you're exactly right. It's a way to kind of enhance certain states, especially like a flow state or just feeling calmer, to learn to bring it on, especially not just based on, bring it on within, right? Like, of course, if we were windsurfing together and we were both good at it, we'd probably get into a flow state, and that's really awesome. But what if, you can't go windsurfing every day? It's pretty cool if you can kind of engage that in a quiet room in your own home for 20 minutes, because it has a lot of just quality of life and fulfillment, and just, again, being a better version of yourself if you're able to have more control and more agency in getting into that state.
And I mentioned just briefly binaural beats before, but I think more and more people are experimenting using binaural beats and other sort of brain entrainment sounds and things like that. Like, how does this connect with neurofeedback?
That's a great question, because if usually people haven't heard of neurofeedback, but a lot of times they've heard of binaural beats. So think of that as entrainment means you're being exposed to a certain hertz or rhythm, right? And then because we have a body, there's biology to our body that our brain will absorb that frequency some, and then it will start to show up in the brain. So think of it in a really basic sense. First of all, if you and I went to a concert and there was a really fast beat, it would probably wake us up and energize us, right? So that's kind of like, it's in a beta or high beta, right? And we're kind of absorbing that. There's literal absorption of the vibration, and then there's of course the sound, and then that's getting integrated and taken in our auditory areas that process auditory information. So that would really ramp us up. If you and I were sitting by a fire, here's your fun, nerdy fact for the day.
Okay.
A fire flickers in the delta frequency. And so when you're sitting by a fire, a lot of times, and then usually lights are off, right? That's why it can have this kind of sedating, calming quality, because it has a very slow flicker rate. And so that's kind of taken us into a slower state, right? So
cool.
Isn't that cool?
That's awesome.
Think of entrainment. The best analogy for entrainment I have heard is like you have a tuning fork, right, that isn't vibrating, and you have another tuning fork that's vibrating at like a C note, and you bring them by each other. This other one will start to ring at that same note because it's absorbing the vibrations. So think of entrainment as something external is a certain rate. You're trying to get that absorbed, into your brain and take you towards the direction of that. So what I think it's a pro is if you're locked into a certain state, entrainment can kind of help take you in the direction of whatever is being entrained. However, what I have observed just in practice is that people really vary in their responsiveness and sensitivity to that. And of course, there's always variance to anything. But I think if you're a generally well person, healthy, pretty flexible as far as neuroplasticity and brain states go, everything else being equal, entrainment might help you. Like if you want to entrain theta, you get into that really fun, deep state where you're not sleeping, but you're not really, there's not much conscious thought, or you lose track of time and just very immersive. Or you could, train alpha. But if someone has a more rigid pattern, entrainment just isn't going to be enough for them to really notice it. Is probably what the options of what people would experience. It's kind of think of neurofeedback would be considered more powerful and versatile compared to binaural beats. But sometimes I used to do it more actually, and this is reminding me about it I would make some like binaural beat CDs or isochronic tones and send people home with that with the frequency that they were training, especially for kids with ADHD. But just think of that as being able to focus better and comprehend better for them to listen to while they study, or just listen to daily to help reinforce the state that they're training in neurofeedback.
Gotcha.
So they would work very well. I think in binaural beats are very good at being supportive and enhancing something someone's already doing.
Cool. And given that, I guess it's probably been a few decades that people have been using binaural beats, and now there's the the Muse headband, which you can buy. Like, is neurofeedback going to become a sort of a ubiquitous tool in the future? Do you see that coming?
I hope so. Yeah, it's already increased in people's interest in it and use of it, because I think people, I don't know what you think, but I think there's been an increase in people being aware and kind of demanding more holistic options, or just, systemic options of looking at really addressing the underlying concerns. And then it's kind of like teach a person to fish versus give them fish options. So I think, and then people not wanting, again, I'm speaking to the more clinical side, to use medications as their only option. So I have seen interest and then availability, because demand has gone up, to go up, and I would expect that to continue. There's some other structural limitations, like how it's reimbursed with insurance, and how other fields view, like how the medical field might view acupuncture or neurofeedback. There's some contention at times around different options, but I do anticipate that it would continue to increase in availability and interest. Especially, it's a technology-based strategy or approach, and so there's just been such an increase in the last 20 years in the sophistication and the accuracy of computers, technology, processing speed, and all of that. So all of that makes neurofeedback better.
And as you're saying that, I'm recalling there's maybe the first prescription video game just got approved. It might be for ADHD as well. I can't remember exactly what it's for, but I remember hearing, perhaps on the Tim Ferriss show, that there's now a prescription video game.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you think is important to share?
I can't think of anything at the moment. I feel like we've covered kind of the main aspects of what we talked about. So unless you have something else, I think that we kind of that was a good starting conversation on what neurofeedback is and how it might be of use.
Okay. I did think of one thing, which is the difference between neurofeedback and biofeedback.
Oh, that's a good one. So neurofeedback is actually under the umbrella of biofeedback. So biofeedback is the umbrella term for something being measured about your physiology, and then that information is being sent back to you in some way, and you're using it to self-regulate. So you could do biofeedback for something called skin conductance. It's like micro levels of sweat on our skin, related a lot to anxiety, especially performance anxiety, or like fear of public speaking. You could do biofeedback for heart rate. So that can be called heart rate variability biofeedback. This is probably in your wheelhouse. It's also called cardiac coherence. So if you haven't, I'm sure one of your listeners has heard of heart math, and that's a specific kind of biofeedback. Yeah. And then, so neurofeedback is also like EEG or brain biofeedback. So it's measuring brain waves and then using feedback to regulate.
Cool. Yeah. And so the HRV that I'm familiar with, at least some of my teammates use the Whoop system, which is like a watch or a band that you wear that measures heart rate variability, and it tells you, how recovered you are, which basically says like how hard of a workout you can do today, or do you need to take more rest so that you're optimizing the physical training side of things. Yep.
Yeah. So those are all under the same umbrella. So neurofeedback is just a specific kind.
Cool. Thank you. Where can people find out more about you and find you online?
Yeah. So they could find me on my website. So my practice is Neurotherapy Center of St. Louis. And then they could also search my name. I have a profile on Psychology Today. That's pretty easy to find. And just search Dr. Ashley Wiegand. My last name's tricky. It is I before E. It's Wiegand. So, but yeah, that's I'm online, and then you have my contact info. I do answer the phone when I'm not in session if somebody wants to do an old-fashioned phone call.
Yeah, and I do appreciate your accessibility too. It was really fun just to reach out and get in touch with you, and then set this whole thing up. So
yeah, I think you emailed me when I was between hikes in Glacier in Montana, and I was just at a coffee shop in
amazing.
Kalispell. So I'm glad that worked out.
Brilliant. Yeah, I love it up there. I love Kalispell. Ashley, thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is so glad to talk about neurofeedback and just glad to be here to have this conversation.
Wonderful. All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, another super cool episode. And I just want to thank you guys for letting me be the guinea pig, and going to test out these techniques is really cool for me. And hopefully we're able to create good episodes so you can understand the potential benefits and uses of these performance enhancing techniques. I definitely want you both to be able to learn about this stuff, but also we want to give you the tools that you can apply this stuff, because I know all of you are searching for what is the peak of our potential. How much can we push the limits of ourselves while we are here? Our physical 3D bodies, how can we optimize them? So speaking of optimizing, I want to talk a little bit more about the League of Superconductors. And if you are a leader, if you have something to share in the world, if you're ready to rock the boat, if you are creating a movement and you're growing your business, if you're looking to scale your coaching business, if you're integrating, you want to learn how course creation and writing books and coaching and speaking, how all of these things fit together and how you can grow a multi-pillared personal brand and how that fits in with your overall mission. That's a lot of what we talk about in the League of Superconductors. So not only are we working with the business model and the personal branding side, we're working with the peak performance side, getting you to be the leader. And of course, we're working on the metaphysical side, the spiritual side, which is underlying all of these things. So if that sounds like something for you, if you feel called, then go to DerekLaudermilk.com. There's a tab for the League of Superconductors, and you can apply, and then we'd hop on a call from there. So if that's you, then I will look for your application. All right, thank you so much for listening today. Now it's your turn to go out there and be adventurous.